וכולם מקבלים עליהם אוי מלכות שמיים אוי מלכות שמיים וכולם מקבלים
Hello everyone, this is the second in the series of being Machmir responsibly. And I'd like to speak today about the second cardinal rule about being more stringent than the Jewish law requires, and that is not at the expense of another mitzvah. There's a very famous Gemara in Masechet Sota, Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet 21b, that talks about a chassid shote, a very pious person who is rather stupid. And the Gemara says, who is a very pious person, who is a rather silly person? Kegon de katave itita benahara, a woman is drowning in the sea right next to you, va'amar, and you say, it's not a good thing for me to look at women that are immodestly dressed. You know, if she's in the ocean, she's probably wearing a bathing suit, but she's drowning and she's screaming, help, 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 but you don't look at women. That's a chassid shote, a very pious, stupid man. Now, we don't usually have such radical cases, I hope, but indeed, there is cases similar. For example, the Tosfot there says, in the name of the Yerushalmi, now it's not a woman, but a young kid, so you can look at him, but you have a problem, you have your tefillin on. So what do? You say, first I'll take my tefillin off, I'll give it a kiss, I'll put it back into its proper place, and then I'll go and I'll save the baby. That's also a chassid shote. But you see, these radical examples are just there to prove a point. And that point is that being machmir may be wonderful, but not at the expense of another mitzvah. As the Orach Chaim on the Chumash says, Lo ama aretz chassid. Someone that is an ignoramus cannot be a pious person. You need to know Jewish law, you need to know priorities in Jewish law, and therefore, lo am haaretz chassid. You can't be pious unless you learn. And indeed, he says, ki lefamim yaseh chumra bedavar shu adarabba avaryan. Sometimes you make yourself a chumrah and you come out to be a sinner. And I'd like to give two examples of what I mean. Example number one. Everybody here knows that the first day of Rosh Hashanah, there is a mitzvah to blow shofar, midoraisa biblically. The second day, rabbinically. Everyone also knows that on Sukkot, the first day, there's a mitzvah to shake your lulav and etrog biblically. And from day 2 through day 7, it's rabbinic. Now, what happens if someone has a doubt in a rabbinic mitzvah of any sort? We all know Safek de Rabbanan Lekula. If you have a doubt in a rabbinic mitzvah, you go lenient. So, accordingly, you would think that if you have a doubt, if you blew the shofar properly in shul on Rosh Hashanah on the first day, you should blow it again, just in case. But on the second day, if there's a doubt, obviously you don't have to do that because it's a rabbinic doubt. But the Mishnah Berurah comes along and says, with exactly the similar case, but in Hilchos Lulav, where on the first day, you don't know if you shook it properly, obviously you should shake it again, even during Ben Hashmashot, during the twilight between day 1 to day 2. Twilight is a Suffolk Yom, Suffolk Laila. We don't know if it's still day or night, but since it's a Suffolk Deoraita, it's a biblical doubt. You should obviously go ahead and shake again. But day 2 through day 7, you don't have to do that. Interestingly, the Mishnah Berurah says on the Lulav episode that you should go ahead and shake again, even through day 2 through day 7, albeit without a bracha. But when it comes to shofar, he doesn't give that wonderful piece of advice. Why? And the answer, I believe, is very simple. When it comes to lulav, what's the big deal? Take it off the table, pick it up. Once again, when it comes to shofar, we have to remember there's a mitzvah to blow shofar, but there's also an isser involved in blowing shofar, and that is our rabbinic commandment not to play musical instruments on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So therefore, by being machmir on shofar, you're being mekel on this rabbinic enactment. So day 1, obviously the biblical will override this rabbinic enactment, but not on day 2. Therefore, the Mishnah Berurah comments on the Lulav episode and says, what's the big deal? But when it comes to the shofar episode, he does not give that piece of advice because he knows that my piece of advice of what's the big deal will actually come upon an expense of another mitzvah, that is the rabbinic enactment not to play musical instruments on Yontif. Example number 2. Everybody here knows that night 1 is different from all other nights. All other nights, if it's raining, mitzta'er patur min hasukkah. If you're uncomfortable, you don't sit in a sukkah. Rain is even a step further. It's like God telling you to leave the sukkah, and therefore you obviously sit inside. But night 1, big machlokes, it's different, and the bottom line is that even if it's raining, you make kiddush, you eat a kezayit in the sukkah, albeit without the bracha leishef basukah, and then you've finished the meal at home. Well, since this is a machlokes, if you should do it in that way, maybe you should be Machmir. How should you be Machmir? Wait till it stops raining. So, you come home from shul, case scenario 6:30, wait till 12 o'clock at night, see what happens. And indeed, there were poskim that said wait a little bit. Wait to some way or another. Comes along the Shvus Yaakov of Yaakov Reisher, and says, this is a huge mistake. And he tells you why. Waiting until midnight may be machmir on the laws of Sukkah. But, I quote, Tehim yamtini machilat b'nei beito hagdolim v'aktanim, en lecha miniat simchan yotov yoter mizeh. You think there's only one mitzvah on Sukkah to live in a Sukkah? There's another mitzvah called Simchas Yontiv, to be happy on Yontiv. And by waiting and waiting and waiting, you're taking away that simcha from all your family. La'anot nefesh b'yom tov, no more, no less, to afflict yourself on Yontif. Va'alakat hanal, and on this segment of the Jewish people, sherotzim litkok et atzman v'le'echol basukah, av sheyodin tipin arbei, bevadai lo shaper avid. And if you want to be the opposite, the sect that sits in the sukkah even when it's pouring, obviously it's not right, because it goes against what I just said. Not only are you uncomfortable, but the Mishnah says, it's like God saying, get out of there. And therefore, he ends by saying, the Torah has to be pleasant. The Torah has to be something that pleasantly adds to your life, not something that makes your life afflicted. We have one day a year that we have in our mitzvah to be afflicted on Yom Kippur, and that's it. And therefore, as we could see from these 2 examples, shofar versus lulav. Example number 2, the sukkah when it rains. Yes, chumras have a place, but not at an expense of another mitzvah. And whatever that mitzvah is, you cannot make a chumrah that will come at an expense of another mitzvah. Be it biblical, be it rabbinic, at the end of the day, it's one system. It's one Torah. And therefore, you don't make a chumrah in one area that comes at an expense of another area.
Levado